This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. This is a joint meeting of Planning and Development Subcommittee and Town Council meeting dated Thursday, January 20, 2022, 6 p.m. Remote access. Before you go to roll call, read this off real quick. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, subsection 18, and is extended into law on June 16, 2021, an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This meeting of the Planning and Development Subcommittee is being conducted via remote participation only. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. Persons who would like to view this meeting while in progress may do so by the remote information noted. Post a record of this meeting on the town's website at www.ci.southbridge.ma.us as soon as we are able. Item number 1, roll call. Councilor Lazo, Councilor Dow, Catherine.
Here.
Dee Dee.
Here, present.
And Councilor Adams is present. Tonight, item number 2, consider and accept planning and development meeting minutes of January 3rd, 2020. Need a first and second.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Need a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Any questions? Recommendation of amendments to the meeting minutes of January 3rd?
No.
Okay. All those in favor, Dee Dee?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes.
Councilor Adams, yes. All right. Agenda item number 4, discuss review whether to apply for the agenda item number 3, discuss review whether to recommend town council approve change order number 1 to J.H. Lynch's Shared Streets construction contract to deduct $23,876.40 and extend completion to May 15, 2022. Need a motion and a second, please?
I'll make a motion. Oh. Okay, I'll second it.
Okay. Right. Discussion. Ms. Dean.
Yes, just a quick summary. These were the field changes that took place during our shared streets construction for the 5 RRFBs around town. The field changes were some increases and decreases. The overall deduct represents what could go back to the sidewalk fund. If you'll recall, when we first approved the shared streets, the construction came in at 301, which the construction came in, if we were to include the alternates, it came in at 301. The town voted to apply to shared streets and take from stabilization to add to sidewalks to make up the difference, to do the full construction plus alternate 1 and alternate 2. And so now we have the 23,000 plus that we can put back into sidewalks. And this spring, we're asking for an extension for them to complete the seeding because obviously we didn't get to it with the installation going in a little later. And then with regards to shared streets in general, there is a new shared streets opportunity for which we could apply this spring, which I'll advocate that we use for pavement treatments and painting of all of the RFPs that we've just done to kind of really perfect the project that we started.
Can you hold one just for a second, please? Sorry, I think my town manager's trying to chime in here. Hey, Michael, are you calling in?
Well, no,
Sorry, guys. All right. Questions on what Ms. Dean had just spoke about? Councilor Marquetti?
Thank you. Should this be a DPW issue? That's my question. If it's coming out of the DPW sidewalk funds and it's going back into annual line painting, and that's a DPW issue, correct?
Ms. Dean?
Yes, so Heather and I were just talking about this earlier today. You know, the closer we work interdepartmentally, which in success stories for towns, the closer your departments can work as a team, the more likely you are to succeed at doing bigger, better projects, moving your town forward. So I think that we're succeeding as a team working together. However, what we're finding is Main Street was our first big example of commingling, leveraging funds as far and as hard as we could to be able to get as much done as we could. The shared streets is another example of where grants is under my job description. I pursued the shared streets. Heather works with me because we're working on a road project. And so when it comes to subcommittee, I don't know how clear and how rigid the lines are between where we should bring these items. But because shared streets from the start has all come through, we continued to bring legacy items that came from, if they originated in one department, we just keep bringing them to that department or to that subcommittee. I think that's the logic we've approached it with.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Councilor Marquetti, anything else on that? Or Heather, did you want to chime in or? Yeah, I can't hear you.
Well, I will just say I'm talking about the subcommittees, not talking about, I understand working department to department. I get that. But this is coming from DPW money. It's going back into DPW work. So I would think that this would go before the DPW subcommittee. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Marquetti. Okay, any other discussion? I guess, to try to answer or at least alleviate some confusion in the near future, maybe we could just have a discussion over it, maybe beforehand, and that's not with Councilor Marquetti. Maybe that's something we could have a discussion, Ms. Dean or Ms. Blakely, between us as chairpersons of our subcommittee meetings, maybe prior to our meeting itself. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm getting feedback.
That was my fault.
I'm getting feedback.
Catherine, you need to say something?
No.
Can you do me a favor and mute your mic?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay now? A lot of feedback on that. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor? I'm sorry, not used to this anymore. Dee Dee?
Yes.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yes.
And Councilor Adams, yes. 3-0. Okay. Agenda item number 4. Give me 1 second. I just got another text. I think Councilor Jovan is trying to get into as well. Give me 1 second. Let me check the website. Christine, I just want to verify our call-in number real quick with you. The access number, access code is 901-595-869.
That's what I used.
Yeah. It's on the
901
top.
869, yes.
Okay, let me just respond to him really fast. All right, let's continue. All right, agenda item number 4. That's a long one. Discuss review whether to apply for the Economic Development Administration's or EDA Travel Tourism Outdoor Recreation Grant for up to $5 million for design and construction of the Quinnebog Valley Rail Trail from Dudley to Sturbridge, and approve the town manager to sign a letter of intent to enter into a lease agreement with Mass DOT. Should funds be secured contingent on the town adopting the DEP's best management practices for the controlling exposure to soil during the development of rail trails when designing the rail trail, and allow the town manager to sign any related paperwork. Need a first and a second, please.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Catherine.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Okay. Ms. Dean?
If I may hand over the presentation to our consultant, Jeff Vassar. I could share my screen and he could walk through some of the high level feasibility study to start the conversation.
Please do.
Thank you, Peg. So, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Jeff Vassar with the BSC Group, and we've been working with the town, mainly Peg and Heather from Public Works on, well, actually, and Eric and your new Parks and Rec person, I forget his name, I'm sorry, on this feasibility study for the rail trail. So, as Peg mentioned, or as the agenda mentioned, the town wants to apply for a federal grant through the Economic Development Administration for funding to build your rail trail. And in order to make that a strong application, the EDA likes to see that the project is real, it can actually happen. So the town asked us to do a feasibility study to confirm that indeed this rail trail can be built. And I'm just going to go through very quickly where we are to date, which confirms that the rail trail, yes, can be built. There are a couple of options in how it can be built and some permitting that needs to be done before it actually can get built. But these are all, none of this is unusual. These are all tasks and permits that we believe are achievable. And I also want to make it clear that this is a feasibility study. Should the town get funding for design and construction, the town and whichever consultant they work with, hopefully it would be us, but it could be somebody else, would need to do a detailed design process with the community to make sure all these different trail alignments and improvements meet the community needs. So what I'm going to go through quickly is our overview of the trail alignments and kind of break it down into the various segments. You all know these segments, so I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, and then I can come back and answer questions if you have any. And then we can talk about the costs associated with this. And as I described the various segments, I'll give a quick explanation of how the trail would be constructed and what some of the issues might be in these various areas. Okay, Peg? One thing that's important is that in the grant application, and we will highlight this in our feasibility study, is providing an overview of what the project is all about. As you know, your segment of this Quinnebog Valley Rail Trail would go from Dudley to Sturbridge, predominantly along the old Grand Trunk Railroad line, to a point where it ends on Crane. And then we have some options of how you could connect on up to Westville Dam. Go ahead, Peg. One of the things we need to emphasize in this is the type of support this project has gotten and is getting currently, and how it will help with the local, boost the local economy in Southbridge. Again, the grants to the EDA, it's under a specific category for recreation and tourism, and we need to make that case in the grant application, and we feel as though we have a lot of points we can make to support that, especially since the trail goes right through downtown. The trail will parallel Route 131 and the commercial corridor there, with the Big Y shopping plaza, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, all the businesses along that. And it also will connect to or go right adjacent to many neighborhoods, residential areas, housing authority property, etc., which really helps connect a number, all segments of your population to this rail trail that they can use for not only health, being outside, but also can use the trail as another way of getting from where they live to your services and commercial areas in the community. Not everybody has a car. We need to remember that, and walking and biking is maybe a way for many people to get around, and this trail will certainly help that, which is part of this equitable access bullet point here. In a couple things are key in this EDA grant application. It's how will the project help the local economy? How will it help overcome some of the impacts of COVID? Therefore, it's, this is an outdoor facility that promotes healthy living. And also, how will it be equitable for all members of the community? And we think you hit all those points very well. Next. So this is a map of the trail. I'm sure, again, you're all familiar there. Upper left, it would connect to the Westville Dam and on into Sturbridge. And by the way, Sturbridge has money to extend their part of the rail trail also. They have about $1 million, and they are hoping to start construction on an extension of the trail through Sturbridge this summer. Dudley also has portions of the trail, that's sort of lower right. And again, they're looking to expand or extend their trail also. So in addition to Southbridge being a critical link between the two communities, those communities also are looking to extend the trail. So once everything comes together, this truly will be a regional trail for everybody in the region. The area we're looking at within Southbridge is approximately 5 miles in length. Based on our feasibility study, the majority of the trail, about 80% of it, would be on the existing rail line. About 20% would be off-road, and that's from Crane up to the Westville Dam area. There are a couple of small pedestrian bridges on the lower portion of the trail now, headed towards Dudley. Those are in great condition and can be reused. However, there are a couple of bridges that train bridges that either been abandoned or removed. One is in the Rotary area, and the other one is just south of that. And we're the feasibility study shows that it's feasible that this trail could continue all the way through with or without bridges in those locations, which I'll get into when we get into some of the segments. Peg? So these are, again, we've broken down the entire length, the 5 miles, into smaller segments, and it's to explain in the feasibility study the different treatments that will happen along the entire corridor so that the town knows what needs to get done where. In the grant application, it'll make it clear to the EDA that the town has thought everything through and is showing what is feasible. But also, I want to make it clear that this feasibility study isn't being done just for this EDA grant. This feasibility study is being done for any type of funding you may go after for this trail project. So we're not doing things that are unique to the grant application. We're doing things that'll help justify your application for any type of funding along the trail. So again, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. We can go back to them, but this is the northwest portion where it connects to the Westville Dam, which is kind of the purple land area here. And as many of you may know, there is a current trail that goes from Westville that winds its way through the West Street School property, goes along the river and pops back up onto West Street. And that would be improved to be the kind of the northern end of the trail. Next slide. Along West Street, this is a situation where, well, West Street and all the way over to River, this is one of the portions where the trail may need to be what we call on road. And that is, there's no more railroad right of way here that was abandoned. And it's tough to find the topography and ownership of property to allow the trail to be off-road. So the most feasible option is to come down West Street and then go along Mill Street through the old industrial area up to River. But we're also showing an option that would go along the river behind those old industrial buildings that are along Mill. There's a variety of uses in there now. And that would require coordination with the property owner to do that. And this is one of those things that would be worked out when you get money to design and build the project. Again, we're showing both feasible options here, and during design that would be worked out. I also want to make everybody aware that we, meaning the team looking at this feasibility study, are aware of the improvements being proposed for West Street, and we've been working with Heather on that. So that as the current improvements are built, it takes into consideration that eventually this will be part of the larger trail network going up west. Next. This next segment is, again, from where we left off on River over to Crane, where in blue you can see that's the current railroad right of way where it ends now. And in this section, the trail would be along the roadway. The road is relatively wide in a good segment of this area. And in other areas, it'll require some coordination with abutters regarding parking. Again, that's a design issue that would be worked out in more detail. But again, it's certainly feasible to have an on-road connection here to the point where you jump onto the railroad right of way, which is in blue. It's kind of by the current optical museum. And that area, because it's large enough, that area in blue not only serves as a point where the rail trail comes onto the roadway, but that could be what we call a trailhead. There could be parking there also for people who want to get onto the rail trail at that point. And that parking could also be shared for people visiting the museum. So Peg, if you can continue. From this point south to Dudley, we are pretty much following the old railroad bed for the whole length here. Through center of town, by the old depot building. We know that your roadway project now that's in design, it'll be a Mass DOT project for the Hook, La Rochelle, Center Street, Hamilton intersection, well, confluence of roadways, I'll call it here, has taken into consideration that a rail trail will be coming through here. So we would tie into those, well, your trail would tie into those improvements and proceed through the downtown, through some areas that what we realize are a little rough right now, and some of the areas of the trail are a little bit secluded and hard to see what's going on in there. Police have shared some of their concerns about activities in that area. And the other thing that comes along with the rail trail was making sure we open up visibility to the trail to make people feel safe that are along the trail. And as you get into design, you may also want to consider what we call blue lights, or those blue bollards that you may have seen. A lot of them are on university campuses, where if somebody feels unsafe, they could push it and connect with the police department. Again, that's a design detail that may come out during the design of this. The next segment gets us to the Rotary area by AO. And in this area, this is where we have the two bridges. One, the one over Main was taken down years ago. Our preferred option is to put a bridge back there, so if people want to stay on the rail trail, they can stay at that higher level and continue along. But we also understand that that's an expense. And then the next crossing, I believe, is Wyman, if I have the name, if I remember correctly. That bridge exists, and it could be a matter of upgrading it or placing what we call a pedestrian bridge kind of floating above it. So it has no structural connection with that current bridge. It sits above it and stands on its own. But in this area, whether there are bridges there or not, we want to bring people down to the street level from that elevated railroad right-of-way, a railroad bed, because it's important. We feel this is an important connection point to the town common, to the American Optical property, and it allows people to get to those destination points, or from those destination points to get up onto the rail trail. So whether the bridges are put in or not, we're proposing that people on the trail have access down to street level at the Rotary with safe crossings all around the Rotary, and some of which have been, well, at least one crossing is in the works already to provide safe passage around that. And then again, people in the area, living in the area, would be able to get back up to the rail trail at this point. And there's a small piece of town-owned property on the south side of the Rotary, just a sliver of land, but it could be another area for parking and trail access for those people not living in the area. Going south from here, we're pretty much following that existing rail bed, except that in the area of this Woodstock intersection here, where, as you know, when that intersection was improved, a portion of the trail was installed at that point, which was great forethought. So we would tie into that paved section of the trail in that area there, which comes off the old rail bed, but it's certainly a fine connection through this intersection. And then continuing further south towards the Golden Greek, we're back up on the rail bed. In this area here, there are, and actually I think all the way up to downtown and through downtown, there are the rails and rail ties are still in place. So as you convert this to a rail trail, those would need to be removed. But believe it or not, there is money in those rails. So we are looking at how you might be able to benefit from having those rails, that steel as an asset to help with the cost here, or at least offset the cost of their removal. You can go next one, Peg, which this again continues along that commercial corridor. This is the segment that's by the Big Y Plaza, McDonald's, etc. And at this point here, you'll see between the blue rail corridor, which has a red line down the middle, which showing our preferred route, and Route 131, which parallels it, there's a small piece of green colored land there. Again, that's town-owned property, which could be another access point, a parking area. And we would also propose a crosswalk here so that if people are on the rail trail and want to cross over to the Big White Plaza, get a drink, get a snack, whatever, there would be a safe crossing here for that. And it would be a benefit to the businesses, benefit to the trail users. And I think it's a win-win all the way around. And then we get to the Golden Greek and the crossing Route 131 by the Golden Greek there. And then we go all the way south to Dudley at this point. So you can go through these relatively quickly, Peg. As you can see in these segments, as you know, we're really not abutting commercial or residential. We're abutting a lot of wetland areas that we will require permitting to do work within proximity of these wetlands and natural resources. We've identified what those would be. We're in floodplain in some areas, again, wetland buffer in some areas. There are some what are called natural heritage endangered species habitat areas here. But, we're not really impacting them, but we're adjacent to them. But those are all permitting elements that we're going to point out in the feasibility study. So everybody's aware of the permitting that will need to get done for this section, all the way down to Dudley. You just want to continue, Peg. And then to the next slide, this shows this town line between Dudley, where the colored parcels, Southbridge, where the colored parcels stop, and Dudley. And Dudley has a pretty good trail at that point that your trail would connect to. And then there's a trailhead by that building, that gray block building that's shown there. So there's already parking at that southern end there where people could park and get on the rail trail if they were headed north. For most of the area where the rail trail will be going on the old railroad bed, there is a good base of material there from the former use as a rail line. And our engineer who's working with us on this, who's done a lot of trail projects, has indicated that that base material in most cases can be reused. It would have to be kind of cleaned up, and there's a term he uses, but that basically a machine would go through and kind of lift it up and clean it and place it back down right where it is, but it would be cleaned of any fines that are in it and form a good base for what we put on top of it for the trail. For the purposes of the grant application and our cost estimate, which would be the next slide, we have done a cost estimate assuming that the entire trail is paved. Once you get into design, you may want to change that in some areas, go with stone dust, what we call stabilized stone dust path, which would be a lesser cost. So we're giving you costs that are more on the high end so that it's a conservative number going in. It's better to get a little bit more than a little bit less. And then as you get into the design, you may change the surface treatment in some areas, but it needs to be a stable walking, biking surface. That's what this project's all about. So construction-wise, we're looking at about $5 million for construction. Over and above that, the industry average is take about 10% of that to cover the cost of design and permitting. And that comes out to be about $1 million a mile, which again is consistent with industry standards. We didn't do our estimate thinking we had to get to that number, but it's good to know that once we did do our estimate and we look back at industry standards, yeah, we're in the range of other bike trails. And for example, in Sturbridge, they're extending their trail 0.84 miles, and they have $1 million to do that. So again, that confirms, about $1 million a mile is what you typically pay for a project like this. So moving on in the slides, again, this is all initially being done as a feasibility study to support your application to the EDA. And We've talked with the Central Mass Regional Planning Agency a couple times, and even just today, looking to get a letter of support from them, which they voted to do today. And one of the things that the EDA, the federal EDA, looks at is this project consistent with, excuse me, local comprehensive economic development strategies? So that's why we met with Central Mass Regional Planning. They're the ones who worked on the Southern Worcester County, what's called CEDS. And again, they voted today that yes, this is consistent, and they will be writing a letter of support. We've also reached out to the federal EDA regional, one of the regional reps about this project, and had conversations with her about it. And obviously she can't make any promises about whether it will be funded or not, but she, didn't put up any roadblocks. She didn't say, she didn't say this is a waste of your time without putting words in her mouth. She says it could be a competitive project, so we've opened up those lines of communication. And if you go to the next one, Peg, I think this was more for our meeting with the Central Mass Regional Planning Agency. It's a little difficult to see, but it just shows, there aren't good maps out there, but it shows how the Southbridge portion, which is in that small blow up on the lower left, how your segment ties into this larger trail network being proposed for Southern Worcester County and the Worcester region in general. So it's good for you, it's good for the region, and especially making that regional connection will help with the grant application to the EDA. So that concludes what I wanted to say, and I don't know, Peg, if you want to add anything in addition.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess the one thing I want to ask is if, because today was the first time I saw Jeff's PowerPoint with the cost estimate in there, does the subcommittee want to make a friendly amendment to increase the grant amount from 5 million to 5.6 million?
Thank you, Ms. Dean. That'd be a friendly amendment from Catherine and then Dee Dee. And basically, Catherine's, the friendly amendment is basically we don't have to vote on it. You're willing to change that, your motion.
Okay, I'm for it. I love the idea, and I would love to see the bridge back by the Rotary. I miss that bridge.
Mhm.
So if it costs even more, I'm for that.
So you're willing to make a friendly amendment to your motion in the amount
Yes.
of how, yes. How much,
Yes,
Ms. Dean? Thank you, Catherine. I'm sorry, Ms. Dean, how much?
I think it was
I'm not sure.
5.6 million, Dave.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I was going back to the slide. It said 5.61, but I think 5.6 would be good. And again, if that's on the very high side, then at least we know we're covered. That also includes, I think important to mention, contingencies, such as if there is what Jeff and the consultants call dirty dirt that has to be addressed, then you've got a certain amount to be able to handle that.
So that friendly amendment is basically $5,610,000, correct?
I would say 5.6 is sufficient.
Okay.
For simplicity, maybe.
Yep, okay. We'll put that in the change for the town council meeting.
Thank you. So Jeff, thank you for walking through all these points. I guess from a big picture perspective, I just want to take a quick zoom out to how we got here. 14 months ago, I heard the counselors asking for the rail trail, and Eric and I put our heads together about how to proceed. We did a lot of homework. We got in touch with everyone about the history of the rail trail. This goes back. This is not haphazard planning, opportunistically going for big money as a Hail Mary because the money is out there. This is planning that's been in the making since, if I look back in the urban renewal plan that Jeff was involved with, that started in 2007. And Jeff says he knows that the conversations were actually 20 years ago started in this town. So the rail trail has been something that's been noted in our guiding documents, the open space planning, the open space and recreation planning, the urban renewal plan, your master plan. They talk about taking advantage of that swath of rail bed to build a trail through the town, a rail trail through the town. And then there's been interest in, for instance, Councilor Marchetti talked about at the last town council meeting, a river walk. And so, as Jeff mentions, a couple times throughout the trail, you're abutting the river, and in some places, out on the east end, you're in these more secluded nature settings. In other parts of the Riverwalk, you might be down towards the Dexter Russell, you might be a little closer to the downtown, but again, you're near that river, just like the rail trail followed. So one of the issues all along was, how do you address being near the river as the wetlands interfere and the drainage issues interfere with your potentially contaminated ground. No one in the town had experience building a rail trail. And so those questions were some of the first we had. And what we heard was they can all be addressed through the design, proper design. And then as we came up against we started reading the guidance through the state. How do you build a rail trail? Well, the first thing they say is do a brownfields phase 1 site assessment. Okay, so we went for it. Last February, we were in conversation with CMRPC. They're finally finishing up the report, saying that there's no exceptional findings except for an existing case from the Concom that's now with the DEP, the 67 Gulf Street that was illegal dumping, and that's needing to be addressed. And then just the inherent nature of being a rail trail. So the Brownfields Phase 1 Site Assessment Report says on page 8 of it, and I put that inside the supporting documents here, that if you follow the DEP's best management practices for soil along a rail bed, that's the way to proceed. Then speaking with the Brownfields Phase 1 Site Assessment consultant, Fussin O'Neill, he'll be there on Monday night, but what he's stated and what the CMRPC consultant who hired Fussin O'Neill stated is that if the town proceeds in good faith following the DEP best management guidelines, they've never heard of a situation where MassDOT or DEP has come after them. There are hundreds of trails throughout the state that have been able to be built. No, we don't know the future of, what Mass DEP's ends are, but they bought the rail beds in the 80s with the intentions of seeing the towns be able to use them for rail trails. And so we did the Brownsfield Phase 1 site assessment. We then went for the feasibility study. No, then we hired BSC to be our own licensed site professional, the LSP, to be able to guide us personally. Can we figure out what the hurdles are between us, the lease, the Mass DEP people? And what we determined was that we need a feasibility study. And so we went ahead with this feasibility study. So in August, we hired them as the LSP. In October, we went for the feasibility study. Through the feasibility study, what we found is it's absolutely reasonable to build a rail trail, very straightforward, through the town. The options that you have come up, of course, for the bridges and the West Main Street intersection and whether or not to do a shared path, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. And we come here today because in the timeline, some miracle happened where suddenly there's ARPA funding that is this one-time opportunity to be able to pursue what other towns would dream of, which is to do it all in one fell swoop. So if we could do the entire length of 5 miles, which I was saying before was 4.5, but thank you, Jeff, for correcting. It's 5 miles. Again, the $1 million per mile is a large project, but then if you look at it in proportion to our other projects, if we're talking about the West Street project being a $3.3 million project, if we're talking about the Hook La Rochelle Way being a $4.4 million project, if we're talking about the Dudley to the Golden Greek that we were going to do for $1 million, which then we only had $600,000 for in the end, proportionately, this is absolutely reasonable, although it's a lot of, here we are, it's a lot to swallow. So then the next thing that came up was with the EDA grant, there were a couple of requirements. One is that we show possession and or we are entering into a lease agreement with the owners. And so what we were told by Fuss and O'Neill, again through the Brownfields Phase 1 site assessment, was that the most liability comes when you first sign the lease until the time of construction. So you think about maybe down by the, adjacent to Dexter Russell, where Heather says it's not in great condition there, it needs to be cleaned up. Or other areas that maybe, are contaminated stone dust if someone was to go, dirt biking down there or something and swallow the dust, So you think about like these random situations where it might cause contamination. So we asked could we wait to enter into the lease until after we are sure we have the money? And EDA said yes. And then, through the guidance, it states you just have to show proof that you are willing to enter into the lease agreement upon being awarded. And so we provided the letter of intent as a way to proceed. There's still a big question mark about whether that is binding enough, but we're in the 11th hour and we're trying our best to pull all these pieces together. I literally sent KP Law attorney Katie Klein today the letter of intent asking, is this a binding agreement? Which I don't think it is. I don't think it binds us to anything. And if it doesn't, then we're going to send it to the EDA people and we're going to ask, even though it doesn't bind us, is this enough for us to be able to be considered? Because we don't want to lose our opportunity to be considered just because we don't have the correct language in the letter of intent. So I think the other hurdle with the EDA grant was, again, that community economic development strategy piece. We weren't specifically called out in the local community economic development strategies for the region, and we literally had to ask how, if we're not spelled out in some planning document, can we otherwise be approved? And they were willing to, like they did today, vote to make that happen for us. Doubly, the Lieutenant Governor was in town today for a ribbon cutting over at the Southbridge Innovation Center. And while she was here, the town manager and I approached her about trying to get a letter of support from the governor's office. We are, I think, besides that, pretty much ready to go should the town want to proceed. So with regards to the liability, that was a concern with the lease agreement. The only issue I have with that is I feel like the town should not have been offered a lease agreement without being told this is non-negotiable. I feel like that misunderstanding 2 years ago kind of created the sort of a backpedaling that we're having to do now. MassDOT traditionally does not allow for negotiation. That they, as a large state agency, are leasing the land for us to be able to build the rail trail, but they are of course protecting their interests. And so then the guidance is, if you go ahead and build the rail trail with them using the DEP best management practices for soil along rail beds, then you are protecting your liability. Hence, we're capping the whole thing, and or where we can, we'll use cleaned, packed stone dust that is still equivalent to capping. And whatever those guidelines are will be the scope for the designer. That is how we protect our liability, along with purchasing general liability insurance, which is nominal in comparison to our overall insurance, $1,600 a year. And so we unfortunately went into that meeting in 2019, it sounds like, with the option to mark up a lease that we really couldn't mark up. And we had no, right, so then there was no recourse. There's no action from there. And so I'm asking you today to sort of hit the reset button with perspective on that lease and say to yourselves, would you be willing to enter into this lease agreement as is, contingent on the town designing according to those DEP best management practices, which is what attorney Katie Klein from KP Law suggests, and Fuss and O'Neill based on the Brownfields Phase 1 site assessment. And under the terms that you're getting all of the funding.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Before I move on, I didn't know if the town manager wanted to say a few words and what his thoughts were on this.
Good evening, Chairman Adams, members of the council, as well as citizen members and others on the call. As Ms. Dean pointed out in the history, shortly after I arrived here, I knew that several councilors did express an interest in us pursuing a rail trail. I've lived in a town with a rail trail. I've been in other communities with rail trails, and they have served as a destination in those communities and have brought with them revitalization of shops along the sides, restaurants, variety of different places, ice cream shops. I can think of plenty in various towns, bakeries, other things. It dovetails with what we're trying to do along our center core, as well as our rezoning efforts and our efforts to get the appropriate liquor licenses for restaurants at all ends of the town, including the center core. I understand that there are inherent risks in doing this, but other towns have gone forward and done it, including my hometown. I understand that once you get to the point where you employ the best management practices, and if you can cover those rail beds with an impervious surface, you're going to limit those liabilities. But I do think that there is a significant opportunity for Southbridge to go forward with that, as we've seen in other communities it's worked for them. What Ms. Dean said earlier, we did have a few minutes with the Lieutenant Governor. I actually spoke to her twice about this and her aides, and they are willing to listen to us a little bit more and maybe get some support from their office, at least with some of our other grant applications. The Lieutenant Governor did say to me that she's in support of rail trails, that they're great economic engines for communities. And I do think, as we have to evolve with the changing economic situation and to bring various jobs and attract people to town, this is, one of the key things that would make this a destination. And as many of you may or may not know, the reason the Lieutenant Governor was here today is because they awarded the siting of the Municipal Police Training Center to the Southbridge Innovation Center. So obviously they felt that Southbridge is a great location, that there were great amenities here. That's only going to serve to boost our local economy. And I think when it's complemented with the various projects we're working on, a rail trail will help make the town a destination. Ultimately the decision lies with the council, but if we're able to get such a project and connect, we'll bring people from other towns that'll come through. And if we have the walkable downtown that we've been investing in, I see no reason why those people aren't going to stop and spend their dollars here in Southbridge.
Thank you, sir. I'll open up to the discussion. Yeah, who's caller number one?
This is Gus. I was on the web a few minutes ago, but I gave the computer to Maureen because of conservation. I'm on the phone now.
Thank you.
I had a couple. So obviously, unfortunately, that means I didn't actually see the paperwork that you guys were showing. So I've got a couple of questions that maybe you were addressed there. So I guess through you to Mr. Fasser, when you were talking about the idea of getting off of the rail trail and getting down to the street at the Rotary, were you looking at the idea of coming down Walnut Street, Maple Street, Lynn Street? Because the railroad, those streets end pretty much right at the railroad, so you don't have to go very far. Although I don't know if they're town-owned or privately owned on those particular points.
So at one point, I guess coming up from the south from Dudley, as you're coming up the rail trail in that direction, there was a point, there's a small parking lot owned by American Optical on the west side of the street that is close to the elevation of the rail trail. And it's my understanding through Peg and Heather that the AO has offered the ability for the rail trail to come down to the roadway elevation there, because again, the elevations are very close. At the other end, on the other side of the Rotary, the north of the Rotary, it would require, our recommendation is a switch, it would be a ramp, but it would be a gentle switchback ramp that would come up from the Rotary up that one side of the steep slope back up to the rail trail, not along the roadways. Where possible, we want to connect the rail trail to those abutting roadways. And there are some grade changes there too. Some of them may work, some of them may not. But again, that's a design detail, because the more points of penetration that you can get on or off the rail trail, the better.
Yeah, and I understand that. That's why I was thinking about, like, if you look at Walnut, I think it's Walnut Street. There's like just a fence between the rail line and the end of the street. There's almost a drop. So that would be a lot simpler and probably a lot less expensive than doing the switchback down to the road.
It definitely would be, yes.
So I don't know if that would make a difference. The other question I was curious about is why I don't know if you actually walked the trail.
Yes, we did.
There are several areas along the stretch where they would be ideal for putting in some sort of historical, ecological, or other kiosk type displays that maybe could be also sources of grant money. If we do some sort of a historical process along the side of the trail, we could also get additional money and attract people to see it for that reason as well.
Absolutely, yes. We had been fortunate enough to be working with the town on a couple of different planning studies, and that was one of the things we recommended for the rail trail, is that as it's developed, there be historic markers, interpretive panels, in places where you want to highlight either the abutting ecology or the abutting prior industrial uses. And towards the downtown area, we were also looking for places where public art could be added as an interest, a point of interest also, so that, again, closer to the downtown, it just adds to, your wall murals, more public art, things like that, and more of the cultural center of the community.
Great, thanks. I'm good. Nice to hear that we're on the same page on that. And the third point is, I don't know if you noticed this, but down by Brookside, there's going to be an area there where we're going to need to upgrade and relabel the fencing on the other end of Brookside Apartments, because I think we need to be careful with that area, because the Conservation Commission maybe 10 years ago had to go through that area, and they ended up having to bury a whole bunch of PCBs and stuff that were there originally from the old site that pre-existed Brookside. And so that area is somewhat contaminated. They got rid of most of the worst of it, but they originally had a fencing along the area behind Brookside as you're going toward Dudley. That the fence is a mess. There's trees collapsing on top of the fence, and that area is contaminated. So, but it's not on the rail bed itself. It's beside the rail bed. It's already been dealt with legally. It's not a danger, but it just needs to be signed and fenced.
Thank you for that information. Every little bit helps.
No problem. Oh, and also, did anybody talk to Scott Benoit? Because he's done a lot of work in previous years on trying to do some rail trail expansion, and then he kind of got burnt out and walked away from it. So.
I don't recall talking with him. I don't know if Peg knows of that individual.
Councilor Steves, is that all you have?
That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Pegwin.
Hi, guys. Very excited to see this project happening. Just last night in the planning board, we were discussing Case Street development over by the AO and the housing that's being put in there. And one of my primary questions was how to give those new residents of Southbridge access to shopping without needing to drive, because it's obviously not very far at all, but there is no convenient way to do it. And if you drive through there, you can see there's a 3-foot wide sidewalk, but there are telephone poles in the sidewalk, so it's narrowing to 2 feet. The bike trail doesn't go all the way past the AO, so it's precarious in some places. And having lived in Denmark, where I was for 5 years with no car and just riding my bike for groceries and everything else, It was wonderful. But so I just patronized all the local shops for everything that I needed. I didn't need to go anywhere else. So it really drove spending in the local community within, a 2-mile radius of where I lived. And I look forward to that again, especially given the concentration of our population in downtown, and giving them easier access by foot, by bike, to the 2 different shopping districts that we have. Well, 3 really, if you go down to the globe. The other thing I wanted to point out, historically, there were a few things. Most of you probably know this, but the trolley that went through town, right? So I believe it was from the Globe all the way down to the AO, there was a trolley, and that's how people got back and forth, and that's what connected all those neighborhoods. So this has been done before, and a lot of mill towns that are rebuilding themselves find those old ideas becoming useful and relevant again. So I think that there's a piece historically there that we are replicating, which is good practice. And I would just say, to follow up on what Gus was saying about historical kiosks, there was a massive Native American trail that went over the Quinnebog just past Big Y, I believe. So there, and was it General Putnam that went through there, I think, at one point? So that's the tie-in. When I read the historical documents, and also those shallow flatbed plains where the Big Y is, were agricultural zones for the indigenous tribes around here. Obviously, it's the most fertile plain when you think about the river ebbing and flowing with flooding plains. So there was a high concentration of activity down there to that end. So those are just historical aspects if we want to tie in the different cultures that have been here before us. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I think it's fantastic. And if there's anything I can do to help, please just let me know.
Thank you, Pam.
Yep.
Anybody else? Councilor Marquetti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a great idea, and nobody wants to turn down $5.6 million. I certainly don't want to. I hope this could happen. The only thing that I have to say is that the problem is with the liability, and it's always been a problem. The liability was a problem back in 2019 when some of these same counselors asked that this go to an attorney for an opinion on the liability. Is the town liable for the cleanup along that trail? And as far as I can tell, reading the paperwork here, we are still liable for it. And I know there's a lot of issues with the trail, some of the contaminations that are on it. And I don't want it, what I wouldn't want to see happen is what happened at the DPW facility, which when the town purchased it for 1.3 million. And then by the time they started finding all these contaminations, then it went up to 10 million, and it's probably higher than that at this point, I don't know. And Mass DEP continues to demand more reports. We just voted on something a couple months ago. They want more reports. They want to know how we're going to clean it up. So I don't know how you're going to get around that. I think Mass DEP is going to continue, or going to demand that we check this out, and we are still going to be liable for it. Great idea. Don't want to turn it down, but I don't think we've resolved the liability issue yet. The other thing is, I lost my train of thought, but that's the only problem that I have with it is the liability. We haven't really resolved it yet. If I get my train of thought back, I'll come back again. But for now, that's where my concerns are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Marquetti.
Anybody? And it did come back to me. If you've had a chance, I hope you all get a chance before you vote on this to read that lease agreement, because everything is on the town. We are liable for everything. The state takes no liability whatsoever, yet they still control that land. Everything falls on the town for that cleanup, policing, insurance, everything. So I hope that you get a chance to read it, look it over very carefully. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Ms. Dean?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I guess there's a stark difference between purchasing that DEP land versus purchasing what you already predict is inherently contaminated by virtue of its use, and therefore following the DEP's best practices for managing the soil next to the rail bed, where we didn't necessarily have that playbook that we knew how to use because we didn't know what we were getting into with the DEP land. So I feel like they are, you know, although the point is taken, yes, there's liability, and liability could be worse in the future. We have this guidance specifically for this purpose to help address it in advance, and we'll design it as such.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Anybody else? So I'll just say, Councilor Daniel?
Yes, thank you. Through you to the town manager. In terms of liability, would leasing the property, which encompasses the rail trail, would that cause problems with our insurance overall? I guess what I'm saying is town property is town property, and whether it's a rail trail or a parking lot or Main Street, are there special considerations that we need to be aware of in terms of liability, or is it a further example of just regular liability issues that any town has?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Council Chairman Daniel, I could try and get a quick turnaround answer for Monday night from our insurance carrier on that particular issue. I do know it's been pointed out in some of these letters in my prior dealings, and I want to say Attorney Klein mentioned it. There's a statute, I think it's Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 23, that when you have certain town-owned land that's designated for recreational uses, such as some of our skateboard parks and other parks, that if it's open to the public and there's not admission charged, I think that you are in some ways alleviated from certain types of liability for lawsuits. Now, I think the way the liability would extend to us is if there's some type of cleanup or something was disturbed, we would own that. But I think Attorney Klein did point out that, you know, if we were to do the lease, that we somehow work in the terms that this is for recreational use, so we would be protected from any type of liability for third parties getting injured. But to your original point, I'll check with Maya if, you know, we are covered if something were to be discovered. There has to be a way that other communities have addressed this. I mean, with everything we do, regardless if it's the rail trail, anytime we're doing large scale projects, there's always some inherent risk. We're going to find something or something's going to break. And I appreciate everybody's concern. And I know we want to, you know, mitigate those risks and limit them to the extent we can. And I'll try and get you an answer from Monday, but I think regardless of what we do and the answer from Maya, we're going to have to take some leap of faith that there may be some risks that we cannot address, and just hope that we don't encounter them. I'll do my best to talk to some of my peers between now and then as well that have rail trails to see how they addressed it. But my guess is in some of those communities, the arrangements and the leases were signed years ago, if not a decade or more ago. So that the current managers and things may not have that knowledge of how they addressed it when they signed the lease. But I will check up with Maya between now and Monday.
Thank you.
May I?
You're muted, Dave.
Chairman, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, may I also respond to Council Chair Daniel? The questions about the liability, one of the suggestions from the prior attorney's review of the lease was that you pursue the MOBD environmental insurance. Attorney Klein verified that is no longer available as an option to towns and hasn't been for quite some time. That was one of the first avenues I pursued, was through MOBD. Can we get that insurance? What we were told was if you do your phase one brownfield, if you do your brownfield site assessment, and in the future you discover liability, you could potentially access future brownfields funds. They have certain buckets of money to be able to pursue, if, related to contamination. And then with regards to general liability, forgive me, town manager, I think that the section is 19.2 that expressly cites the recreational use. So regardless of whether it's in the lease, I would assume they're protected, even though it's not, even if it's not explicitly stated under that statute that's on the books. And also, we did ask Maya about just the general liability, which I mentioned early on. The general liability coverage would be an additional $1,600 per year for the town, which again is nominal in light of our overall Maya expenses. And then, then lastly, the protections that you are taking with the design using the DEP best management practices for soil is supposed to be that mitigating risk in the front end.
Thank you, Ms. Dean.
Okay, that pretty much alleviates my concerns, particularly following the DEP's best management practices. That seems to be something that while it may not eliminate, but it seems to minimize the risks. Am I correct in assuming that or thinking that? Okay. I think this is a great project on the whole. I agree with Councilor Marchetti. This is a wonderful project. And also with Ms. Paquin, I think that it offers a lot to the town. When you think that you could have a trailhead next to an optical museum, a trailhead next to restaurants, a trailhead next to a recreation area with a lake and a dam for people to hike through, why not Southbridge? Why not Southbridge? We're looking for ways to get people to come into town. We've talked about antique shops, we've talked about restaurants, and there always seems to be something in the way. We are in charge of our own future here. We can build the rail trail, and people want to hike. Fitness is never going to go away. People want to hike, people want to walk. This opens up the entire town. I just don't think it's a losing situation. I think that if we build it, people will come. I hate to be cliche, but I think that it just offers so much potential. And why not Southbridge? Why not Southbridge? I think the town manager is correct. We do need to take a leap of faith. And if we continue to hide from dreams, then this town will continue to think that it's a nightmare, when I think that we are actually a very wonderful dream. And I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Daniel. Catherine.
Yeah, I just had a question. Would there be any like bike rentals? Like, I think it would be kind of neat to have bikes with maybe the Southbridge logo or on it or something like that. Or, like the flag of Southbridge or something.
Like a great idea.
Thank you. I would say, we do have a rail trail committee here in town, and I'd offer that up. Right now, they don't have enough members to set up a quorum, and they've been trying for such a long time to clean up that area. And so, I think that would may fall into their lap a little bit as well, and that may poke some interest in building their committee down the road. That's not a bad idea. Catherine, is that all you had? Okay.
Yes.
Anybody?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else? I'd just like to say thank you for the high-level discussion, Ms. Dean, Town Manager, Jeff, and all those that put this together. I do think that investment was worth it to bring you guys on to do this study and take a look at it. I look at Sturbridge and Dudley's done a lot of work, and we're kind of behind the Powerball on this one. I will say I was one of those counselors back in 2019, and my biggest concern after reading that lease with the state was the hazardous liability for those that would go on it, and that was probably that was kind of the culminating reason why we said absolutely not at that time. but we didn't have the details of information that we're receiving at this point in time. I do think the best practices is really going to mitigate that. I feel more comfortable to be able to vote in favor of something like this. But I was one of those counselors in 2019 that said absolutely not. So I look forward to moving forward with this. And there's been quite a few residents within the town that would like to see that rail trail come back to life. And they made it very clear when I ran in 2018. That was one of their things, and they've held me to it for quite some time. So it was nice to see that it's been brought back up with new leadership and guidance. To Jeff, the Rail Trail Committee, we're taking those the steel. Their intent was to take that to help offset the cost of the cleanup, because they were really trying hard to keep that place cleaned up as best they could. So I do know that, and I know there was some legal issues way back before my time on the council, or probably even before I even showed up to Southbridge. I attended the CMRPC meeting the other night, their quarterly meeting, and we went out into breakout sessions, and one of the things was there was a few that work for CMRPC that are in big favor of this within this town, and they wished us the best of luck as we move forward, hopefully. So that was nice to hear that you have other communities or other people through the planning process in support of the rail trail for a place like Southbridge. And I think that's it tells you how far, how some of these people are taking a serious look at our town. I just will say that, again, I reiterate, it was very impressive that you had a high level stakes at this point in time. You had somebody to brief us. You had well-educated thoughts and had taken into the consideration of the hazardous waste that had been up there many years ago. And I just want to thank again the fact that you guys had done this and brought it back up to the front for this town to decide on. And I don't think we got even half of this type of briefing. It was just back and forth between a lawyer and the state, when it came to the lease. So I say thank you to you guys. So is there anything else before we vote? Okay, all those in favor? Catherine?
Yes.
Dee Dee?
Yes,
Did you have something to say, Dee Dee? I'm sorry.
I'm all set. No, I'm all
Okay.
set. Thank you.
Council Adams is a yes, 3-0, with the amendment. All right, agenda item number 5, discuss review whether to submit the expression of interest, or EOI, to the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development to receive feedback in preparation for applying for the one-stop or growth grant opportunities due in June of 2022. In the first and second.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, discussion.
For those of you who didn't maybe see the counselors' packets, this is basically just a chance to chime in from the state or talk to the state about your potential grant opportunities. There are 10 grants for which we can apply in June. We're allowed to, if we submit our expression of interest before February, ask for feedback on up to 5 grants. We've proposed 5 that we think are of our biggest priority. We were proposing MassWorks grants the last 2 years to do work at the AO, and the counselors felt like we were passed over and it's our turn. So this year it's our turn. We're going to go ahead and ask for feedback on doing a MassWorks grant for Hamilton and the sections around the downtown cut-through corridor on Foster and Central that aren't included in the TIP, which will be a pricey project. There used to be a cap on MassWorks of $1 million. There is no longer, and so we're going to see if we can go for more. And that would be all of Hamilton and the portions of Hamilton, Foster, and Central that aren't included, because those, when you've done your best first approach and followed the pavement management program, it was determined that Hamilton was going to cost more than what you could afford in any one year, and you were going to need to find other sources. So this would be the source. Of the other grants, we're looking at historic kiosks in the downtown, just in line with exactly what counselors are talking about, could accent the rail trail, or what, Ms. Paquin's talking about along the rail trail. We're talking about another grant to be able to do mural projects around downtown, another to bolster underutilized properties in the downtown, in line with what Jeff and the BSC group found would promote economic development in the downtown through their local rapid recovery planning grant. And then also look at how to revitalize the Globe Village. So if with your approval, we submit this, then they give us feedback, they tell us which ones they think would be approved, not approved, then we would come back to you for approval to apply for those specific grants come May.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Discussion. Okay. All those in favor? Oh, hold on a minute. Councilor Marquetti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a pretty good document that she put together. I would encourage that you let her go through each one of these. It's pretty interesting. I don't know what a house doctor is, but I think all of this, I would encourage you let her go through each one of these so everybody has a chance to hear about it. That's all. Maybe ask questions on each one of them. There's more than this, than just one. There's Hamilton. There's also the kiosk, as she said. There's,
Yeah.
I mean, unless you don't want to take the time, but there's the Central Street parking lot, pedestrian plaza. That one I have a problem with. But the rest of them are all pretty good.
You can
I don't
make,
understand that. I don't understand that Central Street. It's a parking lot. That's what I would think the businesses will want, a parking lot. But that's all right. I think you should let her go through these.
Ms. Dean, if you want to discuss each one, but I would make it a probably layman's terms pretty quick if you need.
Yeah, you can make it quick if you want. Yeah.
Sure, and thank you, Councilor Marquetti. So beyond the MassWorks grant for Hamilton Street, you have the Commonwealth Places, where we would propose doing a historic walking tour through the downtown and put plaques and QR codes in designated markers according to the Historic Commission and the local historic district committee and the historical society. Those can all weigh in on locations. I envision Steve Brady or some local historian being able to do the audio tour for the downtown walking tour, and these are great because you can build on them, so it can stretch as far and as wide as you want depending on as money comes in. Your initial phase here, you would need to do 50% of it would need to be crowd funded specific to that project. And so however much you can raise in crowdfunding, you can get in grant funding up to $50,000. And the goal is obviously to highlight our beautiful historic downtown. The urban agenda, this was the same grant we went for last year. This is to promote the pedestrian plaza at the Central Street parking lot, which was designed for community, commerce, and culture. And we are trying to highlight how you can really activate that space, visualize that space. And so, as was discussed in a recent town council meeting, if not just 1 year's worth of concerts, 2 years worth of concerts, this would be fiscal year 23 spring, fiscal year concerts. You'd have at that time 3 years of concerts, and hopefully you'd really start to see a little bit of momentum with activities in the downtown. And then with the real estate technical assistance, you're hiring a house doctor is what we use the term for when we did housing rehab here in town using CDBG funds. A house doctor is really just the specialist who goes in and agrees with what upgrades need to be done according to building code, etc. And so you would use technical assistance for your underutilized properties, for your real estate technical assistance for your downtown, for an underutilized property or underutilized properties, depending on, what was the goal of the, whatever the terms are we put within the application. The last one, remind me.
Globe Village, you have Globe Village too.
The Globe Village was Globe Village was the real estate technical assistance. The underutilized properties is the downtown underutilized buildings with the house doctor. So the real estate technical assistance, they have what's called a transformational, I brought this up when we were applying for the urban agenda. It's the transformational, gateway cities are eligible for these TDIs. They're transformational development initiatives that really like put together the biggest opportunities, biggest bangs for your buck. I feel like this is as close to getting those TDI opportunities from the state as you can get. You're basically getting technical assistance from a real estate consultant through the state that comes in and kind of helps you strategize, what's going on with that area. And so I just saw that and it popped out that, the Globe Village, this would be a great opportunity for us to kind of help kickstart things. I know that everyone's talked about Globe Village for the last few years. We did the best job we could do with the zoning. Now we've got like all the pieces in place. Okay, now let's get an expert to come in and tell us what's next, because I'm not an expert in real estate. And so that's it in a nutshell.
And then you have something about the arts buildings downtown, which is a good idea. I always thought that was a good idea.
Is that part of the Commonwealth? You can tell I'm obviously not looking at my paperwork. I have
Underutilized properties program. You were talking about the gateway players and needs for an arts building. And,
the underutilized properties. So with the house doctor, so what we talk about is how do we bring in, how do we use those buildings to their optimum? There's a couple buildings, we all know what those couple buildings are, key buildings in the downtown that, could potentially be spaces that could be better used if the proposition was there, if the, who knows what the elements are that would need to make it happen. And they could be spaces that potentially, yes, our gateway players could use. And with the Commonwealth Places, the murals was tied into the, or not Commonwealth Places, with the urban agenda. So I'm picturing the concerts and the murals all being part of this downtown urban agenda.
So this would be for a total of about what, 4 or 5 million, something like that. Put them all together.
Hamilton itself is a very large infrastructure project. The rest of them are small. 50,000 for the Commonwealth and the Urban Agenda grant, and then we're looking at somewhere around 50 to 100 for the underutilized properties and the real estate technical assistance.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the quick brief. Obviously, our opinions differ between Councilor Marchetti and Councilor myself on that thing. I truly believe if you build it, they will come, and slowly, surely, we're starting to see them approach that level. So, anyways, anything else? Okay. All those in, let's see, I'm sorry. All those in favor? Catherine?
Yes.
Edie?
Yes.
Also Adams, 3-0. Agenda item number 6. Are we discussing this at all? All right, I'm assuming no. About the Central Street or Central Pizza's property, are we discussing this tonight?
No.
Thank you. I'm going to take this off from now on until they actually provide documentation, and then we're ready to go with this. I think this is, we put it was kind of a placeholder. I'm hoping that something will be updated. All right. Anyways, okay. Agenda item number 7. Motion to adjourn.
Second. I second.
Second, Catherine.
Yes.
First.
First.
All right. Thank you. All right. All's in favor, Catherine,
Yes.
Edie,
Yes.
Counselor Adams, yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Do you need me to stay on?